The candle nearly fell from Clara Whitmore's hand when the library door slammed open behind her. She spun around, heart pounding, and found herself facing a tall man with cold gray eyes and a jaw set hard with anger. He did not introduce himself. He did not need to. The crest on his coat told her everything. "Who let you in here?" His voice was low, sharp, dangerous. Clara straightened her spine, refusing to shrink under his glare. "Your solicitor, Your Grace. I was hired 3 days ago to catalog this library." "I was not informed." "Then perhaps someone forgot to tell you," she said, "because here I am, and here are 400 years of your family's books, sitting in disorder and rot." For a moment, he said nothing. He simply studied her, as if trying to decide whether she was foolish or fearless. Few people spoke to Edmund Ashford, Duke of Wren Hollow, with such directness. Fewer still survived his temper without flinching. He stepped further into the room, his boots echoing against the stone floor. Rows of shelves rose to the ceiling, thick with dust, spines cracked and pages yellowed from years of neglect. It was true. The library had been forgotten, much like everything else in this house since his father's passing. "You have no right to touch what belongs to this family," he said. "I have every right," Clara answered. "Your solicitor signed a contract. If you wish to dismiss me, you may do so through him, not by shouting at a woman standing on a ladder." Something flickered behind his eyes, not quite amusement, not quite respect, but something close to both. He turned without another word and walked out, leaving her alone among the dust and silence once more. Clara exhaled slowly, her hands trembling as she gripped the ladder rail. She had heard the stories about the Duke of Wren Hollow long before she arrived at his estate. The whole of London whispered about him, a man who had rejected proposal after proposal, breaking the hopes of countless noble families. Some called him heartless, others called him broken. She had not expected to meet him her very first week, and certainly not like this. She turned back to the shelf in front of her, forcing her hands steady, and continued sorting the books by author and year. She needed this position. Her father's debts had left her family with almost nothing, and this contract, however difficult the Duke proved to be, was the only thing standing between her and ruin. 3 floors above, Edmund paced his study, jaw still tight with irritation. His grandmother, Lady Beatrice, sat in the corner chair, watching him with the calm patience of a woman who had raised him since he was a boy. "You didn't need to frighten the poor girl," she said. "I did not frighten her," Edmund muttered. "She frightened herself with her own audacity." Lady Beatrice smiled faintly. "A woman who speaks her mind to you. How refreshing. Perhaps I should keep her around. She is a cataloger, grandmother, not a guest. And you are a duke who has rejected 12 proposals in 2 years, she said, rising from her chair. Do you know what they call you now in London drawing rooms? The duke who cannot be won. It is not a compliment, Edmund." He said nothing. He had heard the name before. He had earned it, and he did not care. "I do not intend to marry for the sake of gossip," he said finally. "I will marry when I choose, if I choose." "You had better choose soon," Lady Beatrice said, pausing at the door. "The family cannot survive on your stubbornness alone." She left him standing there, staring out the window toward the gardens below, where the last light of afternoon stretched long shadows across the lawn. He thought of the proposals he had turned away, daughters of earls, heiresses with grand dowries, women who smiled sweetly and spoke only of dances and dresses. None of them had ever challenged him. None of them had ever looked him in the eye the way the woman in his library had just minutes ago. He told himself it meant nothing. Down in the library, Clara worked late into the evening, her fingers stained with dust and ink. She catalogued each volume with careful attention, noting titles, authors, and condition in a leather ledger she had brought from home. It was tedious work, but she found comfort in it. Books did not judge her circumstances. They did not care that her family's fortune had collapsed, or that she now worked with her hands instead of attending balls like the daughters of her father's old friends. As she reached for a heavy volume on the highest shelf, her foot slipped on the ladder rung. She gasped, grabbing for balance, and the book tumbled from her grip, crashing to the floor with a loud thud. "Careful." She turned sharply. The Duke stood in the doorway again, arms crossed, watching her with an unreadable expression. "I did not hear you come in," she said, climbing down carefully. Clearly. He walked over and picked up the fallen book, examining its spine. "This is a first edition. Do you have any idea what it's worth?" "I imagine quite a lot, which is exactly why I am trying to preserve it, Your Grace, despite the poor lighting and the broken ladder your staff provided me." He glanced at the ladder, noting the loose screw at its base. For the first time, something like guilt crossed his face. "I will have it repaired," he said quietly. Thank you. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Clara busied herself brushing dust from her sleeves, unsure whether he intended to stay or leave. He did neither. Instead, he walked slowly along the nearest shelf, running his fingers over the spines as though remembering something long buried. My father used to read to me in this room, he said, almost to himself. Every evening, before supper, I have not stepped foot in here since he died. Clara said nothing, sensing the weight behind his words. She had lost her own father in a different way, not to death, but to shame and debt, watching him become a shadow of the man he once was before he passed quietly, defeated by his failures. I am sorry, she said softly, for your loss. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, as if surprised by the sincerity in her voice. Most people who spoke to him about his father did so with pity dressed as politeness. Hers sounded different. It sounded real. You are not what I expected, he admitted. Neither are you, she replied, and for the briefest moment, something like a smile touched the corner of his mouth before he caught himself and turned away. Finish your work, he said, his voice returning to its usual coldness, and see that the ladder is fixed before you climb it again. He left without another word, but Clara noticed he walked slower than before, glancing once more at the shelves as though seeing them, and perhaps himself, in a different light. That night, as she prepared to leave the estate for her small rented room in the village, the housekeeper, Mrs. Fenwick, stopped her in the hallway. You spoke with His Grace today, the older woman said, eyes wide with curiosity. In the library. He came to check on his books, Clara said carefully. Mrs. Fenwick chuckled. He has not stepped foot in that library in 3 years, dear. Not since his father's passing, and not since Lady Vivian left him standing at the church steps before that. Clara's brow furrowed. Lady Vivian? His betrothed. Or she was, before she chose a wealthier title over him. Mrs. Fenwick shook her head. Broke something in him, that did. He has not trusted a woman's intentions since. Every proposal that comes his way, he sees only ambition and greed behind the smile. Clara absorbed this quietly, understanding now the guarded coldness she had witnessed. It explained the sharpness in his eyes, the way he seemed to test every word spoken to him for hidden motives. Well, she said finally, gathering her shawl, he has nothing to fear from me. I am only here for the books. Mrs. Fenwick gave her a knowing look, but said nothing more. As Clara walked down the long gravel path toward the village that evening, the estate rising tall and silent behind her, she found herself thinking not of the books she had catalogued, but of the man who had stood among them, speaking of his father with such quiet grief. She told herself it was simple curiosity, nothing more, but something in his eyes had stayed with her, long after she left the grounds. The following morning, Edmund found himself standing outside the library door earlier than he intended, telling himself he only wished to inspect the ladder repairs. He pushed the door open and found Clara already there, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, illuminating the dust that danced in the air around her. She did not notice him at first, absorbed in her work, humming softly under her breath as she arranged a stack of worn poetry books. There was something peaceful about the scene, something he had not felt in this house for a very long time. He cleared his throat, and she turned, startled. Your Grace, I did not expect you again so soon. I came to see the ladder, he said, though his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than necessary. It has been fixed. Your staff were quite prompt. Good. He hesitated, unsure why he remained standing there instead of leaving. Which book were you reading, before I interrupted? Clara held up the worn volume in her hands. Poems by a lesser-known writer your family seems to have collected decades ago. The verses are rather beautiful, actually. Read one, he said suddenly, surprising himself. Clara blinked. Your Grace? A line. Any line. I am curious what my grandfather found worth keeping. She hesitated only a moment before opening the book and reading softly, her voice steady and clear, carrying gently across the quiet room. Edmund stood still, listening, something in his chest loosening for the first time in years. When she finished, neither of them spoke for a long moment. Thank you, he said quietly, and this time, he did not sound like a duke giving orders. He sounded like a man remembering, however briefly, what peace felt like. He left the library that morning without another harsh word, and Clara found herself watching the door long after he had gone, wondering what exactly had just happened between them, and why her heart had not yet slowed down. Neither of them spoke of it, but something had shifted, and in a house that had known only silence and grief for years, that shift felt like the first breath of spring after a long, cold winter. Edmund did not intend to return to the library that evening. He told himself the same thing 3 times as he walked the long corridor from his study, past the portraits of ancestors who all seemed to watch him with the same stern disapproval his father once wore. Yet his feet carried him there anyway, past the heavy oak door, into the dim glow of candlelight where Clara still worked, later than she should have. "You are here past dark," he said, stepping inside. Clara looked up, startled but not afraid this time. "The days are too short for the amount of work your family has left undone, Your Grace. I did not notice the hour." "You should notice. The roads are not safe after nightfall." "I did not realize the Duke of Wren Hollow concerned himself with the safety of a hired cataloger." He did not have an answer for that, not one he was willing to admit aloud. Instead, he walked further into the room, glancing at the neat stacks of books she had organized, rows that had once been chaos now arranged with careful precision. "You have made progress," he said. "It is slow, but yes, your family owns some remarkable works. I found a manuscript this afternoon I believe predates your grandfather's time. The ink is faded, but the handwriting suggests it may have belonged to your great-grandmother." Edmund's brow lifted with genuine surprise. "I did not know that existed. Would you like to see it?" He hesitated, then nodded. Clara retrieved the manuscript carefully from a locked drawer, setting it gently on the reading table between them. Edmund leaned over it, his expression softening as he studied the faded handwriting, tracing the looping letters with careful eyes. "She wrote about the gardens," Clara said quietly, standing beside him. "About watching her children play beneath the old oak tree near the west wing. It is rather lovely, actually." "I used to play beneath that same tree," Edmund murmured, almost to himself. "Before everything changed." Clara glanced at him, sensing the weight behind his words but choosing not to press further. Instead, she waited, allowing the silence to settle comfortably between them, rather than awkwardly, as it once had. "You loved your father a great deal," she said finally. "He was the only person who never expected anything from me except honesty," Edmund admitted. "After he died, everyone else began expecting a title, a fortune, an heir. No one asked what I wanted anymore. They only asked what I could offer them." Clara understood that weight more than he realized. She had watched her own father transform under the pressure of expectation, crumbling beneath debts he could not repay, ashamed to face the daughter who once believed him invincible. "People often mistake position for worth," she said softly. "They forget the man beneath the title." Edmund turned to look at her then, truly look at her, as though seeing something he had not expected to find in his own library. "You speak as though you understand that better than most." "I do," she admitted. "My father lost everything 2 years ago, not through fault of his own entirely, but through bad investments and worse advice. I watched people who once called him a dear friend turn their backs the moment his fortune disappeared. It taught me that most affection in society is bought, not earned. And yet you do not sound bitter." "I choose not to be. Bitterness serves no one, least of all myself." Edmund studied her for a long moment, something unfamiliar stirring behind his composed expression. He had spent years surrounded by women who flattered him for his title, who laughed at jokes he had not made and agreed with opinions he had not shared. Clara did neither. She simply spoke honestly, without artifice, without calculation. It unsettled him, and yet, he found he did not wish to leave. "Tell me something else," he said, surprising even himself with the request. "Something true, not about books or dust or ladders, something real." Clara considered the request carefully before answering. "I once dreamed of traveling to Italy. My father promised to take me before everything collapsed. I still keep a small drawing of Florence pinned above my writing desk, though I doubt I shall ever see it in person now. Why not? Because dreams require resources I no longer possess, Your Grace. Some ambitions are simply left behind when survival becomes the priority." Edmund fell quiet, considering her words with an intensity that surprised her. He had never had to abandon a dream for survival. His life had been built entirely on privilege, even as it lacked warmth. Listening to her speak of sacrifice with such calm acceptance stirred something uncomfortable within him, an awareness of how sheltered his suffering truly was, however real his grief remained. "Perhaps dreams are not always left behind," he said quietly. "Perhaps they simply wait for the right circumstances to return." Clara glanced at him, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. For a moment, the Duke of Wren Hollow did not seem cold or guarded at all. He seemed, simply, human. Days passed, and their evenings in the library became a quiet ritual neither acknowledged aloud, but both anticipated. Edmund found reasons to visit, checking progress, inquiring about discoveries, occasionally bringing a cup of tea he claimed was simply left over from his own study. Clara welcomed his presence more than she cared to admit, finding in their conversations a rare honesty absent from the rest of her carefully guarded life. One evening, as autumn rain tapped gently against the tall windows, Edmund arrived to find Clara laughing softly at something she had read, a genuine, unguarded sound that filled the quiet room with unexpected warmth. "What amuses you so?" he asked, stepping inside. "A letter, tucked inside one of your grandfather's old journals. He apparently attempted to court your grandmother with the worst poetry I have ever read in my life." Edmund raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Read it to me." Clara hesitated, glancing at him with mock seriousness. "Are you certain, Your Grace? Your family's dignity may never recover." "I believe I can bear the risk." She read the verse aloud, and by the end, even Edmund found himself laughing. A deep, genuine laugh that seemed to surprise him as much as it delighted her. It was the first time she had heard him laugh freely, without restraint or guardedness, and something in her chest tightened at the sound. "You should do that more often," she said before she could stop herself. "Do what?" "Laugh. It suits you far better than scowling." Edmund's smile faded slightly, though not unkindly. "I have not had much reason to laugh in recent years." "Perhaps you simply forgot how," Clara said gently. "It happens, sometimes, when grief settles too long in one place." He studied her for a long moment, the rain continuing its soft rhythm against the windows, the candlelight flickering warmly between them. "You seem to understand grief rather well, for someone so young. Grief does not discriminate by age, Your Grace. It simply arrives, uninvited, and teaches us to carry on despite its weight." Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them, fragile and new. Edmund broke the silence first, clearing his throat and straightening his posture as though remembering himself. "I should let you finish your work," he said, though his voice lacked its usual command. "Of course, Your Grace." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway, glancing back at her one final time. "Clara." It was the first time he had used her given name. "Yes, Your Grace. Thank you, for the laughter." He left before she could respond, and Clara stood there long after the door closed behind him, her heart beating with a warmth she had not expected to feel again. Not after everything her family had lost. Not after learning how quickly the world could turn cold. Yet here, in this quiet library filled with dust and forgotten books, something new was beginning to grow, fragile as spring's first bloom, uncertain of the storms that might still come, but undeniably, unmistakably alive. Lady Beatrice noticed the change in her grandson before he did. It began subtly, in the way he lingered longer at breakfast, asking after the library's progress with a curiosity he had never shown before. It continued in the way his temper, usually simmering just beneath the surface, had softened in recent weeks, replaced by something calmer, more patient. She noticed it in the small things, the way he hummed absently while reading correspondence, the way his eyes drifted toward the library wing more often than any duke's eyes should. She decided to investigate for herself. Late one afternoon, she made her way to the library under the pretense of searching for an old family Bible, though she knew perfectly well where it was kept. She found Clara alone, carefully repairing a torn page with practiced precision. "Miss Whitmore," Lady Beatrice said, announcing herself. Clara startled, rising quickly. "Lady Beatrice, I did not expect you." "Clearly not. Sit, sit. I am merely an old woman, curious about her grandson's newfound fascination with dusty books." Clara's cheeks warmed slightly, though she kept her composure. "The Duke has taken an interest in preserving his family's collection. I believe he found the manuscripts meaningful, given their connection to his father and grandmother. Is that so?" Lady Beatrice studied her carefully, taking note of Clara's steady gaze, her quiet confidence, the intelligence evident in her careful words. "Tell me, Miss Whitmore, what do you make of my grandson?" The question caught Clara off guard. "I beg your pardon?" "You have spent considerable time with him these past weeks, more than any other woman has managed in years, and certainly more willingly than any of the young ladies who have paraded through this house hoping to secure his hand. What do you make of him?" Clara chose her words carefully. "I believe he is a man carrying more grief than he allows others to see. Beneath his guardedness, there is kindness, though he seems reluctant to trust it." Lady Beatrice's expression shifted, something thoughtful crossing her weathered features. "You see him clearly then, more clearly than most." "I only speak what I have observed, Lady Beatrice." The older woman moved slowly toward the window, gazing out over the gardens below. "Do you know why he refuses every proposal brought before him?" I have heard whispers about Lady Vivian. Vivian broke something in him that I fear may never fully mend, Lady Beatrice said quietly. She courted him for 2 years, promised her devotion, then abandoned him the moment a wealthier title expressed interest. He learned, too young, that affection can be bought and sold like property. Since then, he trusts no woman's intentions, certain that behind every smile lies calculation. Clara's chest tightened at the revelation, understanding now the depth of the wound she had only glimpsed in his quiet confessions. That is a terrible thing to carry. It is, Lady Beatrice agreed. Which is why I find it curious, Miss Whitmore, that he laughs again in your presence, that he seeks reasons to visit this library nearly every evening, that he speaks your name with a softness I have not heard from him in years. Clara's breath caught. Lady Beatrice, I assure you, my intentions are only professional. I have no designs upon his Grace's title or fortune. I did not accuse you of such, Lady Beatrice said, turning back with a small, knowing smile. In fact, I suspect that is precisely why he trusts you. You want nothing from him, Miss Whitmore. And that, I believe, is exactly what he needs. She left the library without another word, leaving Clara standing amid the quiet shelves, her heart racing with the weight of unspoken possibility. That evening, when Edmund arrived as he now did most evenings, Clara found herself studying him differently, aware now of the wound Lady Beatrice had described, the careful walls he had built around himself after Vivian's betrayal. She understood now why every touch of trust seemed to cost him something, why every moment of openness came only after visible hesitation. You are quiet tonight, Edmund observed, settling into the chair across from her reading table. I spoke with your grandmother today, Clara admitted. Something flickered across his face. Ah, and what did she share with you? Enough to understand your caution around women who seek your attention. Edmund's jaw tightened slightly, though he did not look away. Then you understand why I have rejected every proposal brought before me. I will not be made a fool twice. I do not seek your title, Your Grace, Clara said gently. I never have. I know, he said quietly. That is precisely why I find myself here each evening, rather than anywhere else. The confession hung between them, fragile and honest. Clara's heart pounded at the vulnerability in his admission, understanding the courage it must have taken for a man so guarded to speak such words aloud. I find myself looking forward to your visits as well, she admitted softly. Though I confess, I did not expect to feel this way when I first arrived. Neither did I, Edmund said, a faint smile touching his lips. You have a way of disarming me, Clara, that no one else has managed in years. Their eyes held across the candlelit room, the quiet space between them charged with something new and fragile, something neither dared name aloud just yet. Outside, the estate settled into evening stillness, unaware of the delicate bond forming within its walls, a bond that would soon be tested by forces neither Edmund nor Clara could yet foresee. For now, though, in the warm glow of candlelight surrounded by centuries of forgotten books, they allowed themselves simply to exist in that fragile, hopeful moment, unburdened by the weight of the world outside the library door. Lord Percival Hale arrived at Wren Hollow on a gray Thursday morning, his carriage rolling up the long drive with the confidence of a man who believed the estate would soon belong, in some fashion, to his family. Edmund received him in the drawing room with polite but distant formality, well aware of Percival's ambitions long before the man opened his mouth to speak them. Edmund, Percival said warmly, settling into a chair uninvited. It has been too long. Percival. Edmund's tone remained carefully neutral. To what do I owe this visit? Can a man not simply call upon an old friend? Percival smiled, though his eyes carried calculation beneath their charm. Though I confess, I do have a matter of some importance to discuss. My sister Charlotte speaks of you often, Edmund. She admires you greatly. Charlotte is a fine woman, Edmund said carefully, but I have no intention of pursuing a match at this time. Percival's smile tightened slightly. Come now. You cannot avoid marriage forever. The family name requires an heir, and Charlotte would make a formidable duchess. Our family's union would strengthen both our positions considerably, particularly given the political tensions rising in Parliament this season. My marriage is not a political tool, Percival. Everything is a political tool, my friend, whether we admit it or not. Percival's gaze sharpened. I have heard whispers, Edmund, about a certain woman working within your library, a cataloger, I believe, of rather modest circumstances. Edmund's expression hardened instantly. Miss Whitmore is employed to organize my family's collection, nothing more. Is that so? Percival's smile turned knowing, predatory, because the gossip circulating through London suggests otherwise. They say the Duke of Wrenhollow visits his library each evening, lingering far longer than any inventory requires. They say he has been seen laughing, smiling, behaving unlike the guarded man London has come to know these past years. Gossip is rarely accurate, Edmund said coldly. Perhaps not, Percival conceded, rising from his chair. But perception matters a great deal in our world, Edmund. A duke entangled with a woman of no fortune, no title, no connections. It would embarrass your family name considerably, particularly now, when alliances matter more than ever. Are you threatening me, Percival? I would never dream of it, Percival said smoothly, though the warning in his eyes remained unmistakable. I am simply reminding you of your responsibilities. Consider Charlotte's proposal carefully, Edmund. And consider, too, the company you keep within these walls. Reputations, once tarnished, are rarely restored. He left shortly after, his carriage disappearing down the long drive. But his words lingered in the air long after his departure, heavy with unspoken threat. Edmund stood alone in the drawing room for a long while, anger and unease warring within him. He had faced political pressure before, endured countless attempts to maneuver him into advantageous marriages, but something about Percival's veiled threat toward Clara unsettled him deeply, more than any previous scheme had managed. He found himself walking toward the library that evening earlier than usual, driven by an urgency he did not fully understand until he saw her there, safe among her books, and felt the tension in his chest ease slightly. You seem troubled, Clara observed, noticing his tense expression immediately. Lord Percival Hale visited today, Edmund said, choosing honesty over concealment. He wishes to secure a match between myself and his sister. Clara's expression remained carefully composed, though something flickered briefly behind her eyes. I see. And what did you tell him? That I have no intention of pursuing such a match. Edmund hesitated, then added quietly, he also spoke of you, Clara, of gossip circulating through London regarding my visits here. Clara's breath caught slightly. What sort of gossip? The sort that could damage your reputation, should it spread further. I am sorry. I did not intend to place you in such a position. You did not place me anywhere, Your Grace. I chose to remain in this library each evening as much as you chose to visit it. Her honesty, as always, disarmed him completely. Percival is not a man who accepts rejection gracefully. I fear he may attempt to cause trouble, for both of us, if he believes it will secure his sister's position. Then let him try, Clara said, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty beneath its bravado. I have survived worse than gossip, Your Grace. My family's collapse taught me that whispers cannot break what determination refuses to yield. Edmund studied her with quiet admiration, struck once again by her resilience, her refusal to be diminished by circumstances beyond her control. You are remarkable, Clara Whitmore. And you, Your Grace, are far kinder than London gives you credit for. They sat together that evening longer than usual, the weight of Percival's visit hanging unspoken between them, yet neither willing to let it steal the fragile warmth they had built within these walls. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy, a quiet warning of turbulence yet to come. The scandal broke 3 days later, swift and merciless, exactly as Edmund had feared. A letter arrived at the estate, delivered by an anonymous courier, addressed not to Edmund, but circulated instead among London's most prominent gossip columns. It claimed, falsely, that Clara Whitmore had once been dismissed from a previous position for improper conduct with her employer, painting her as a calculating woman who used her charm to secure favorable positions among wealthy men. By the time Edmund learned of the letter's existence, it had already spread through London's drawing rooms like wildfire, each retelling more damaging than the last. He found Clara in the library that afternoon, pale and shaking, a copy of the offending column clutched tightly in her trembling hands. Clara, he rushed to her side. What has happened? They are saying terrible things about me, she whispered, her voice breaking. Lies, Edmund. Cruel, calculated lies, and I do not know who would spread such falsehoods, or why. Edmund took the column from her hands, reading the vicious words with mounting fury, recognizing immediately the careful construction of Percival's revenge. This is Percival's doing. I am certain of it. Why would he go to such lengths? Because I refused Charlotte's proposal, and he believes destroying your reputation will force me toward reconsidering it, or at the very least, remove you from this house entirely. Edmund's jaw clenched with barely restrained anger. He has miscalculated badly. Edmund, I cannot stay here now, Clara said, her voice trembling. If this scandal continues, it will ruin not only my reputation but yours as well. I should leave, before further damage is done. No, The word left him with unexpected force. I will not allow him to frighten you away, Clara. Not after everything we have built these past weeks. But your family's name means nothing to me if it costs me your presence, Edmund interrupted, his voice raw with an honesty he had rarely allowed himself. I have spent years guarding myself against exactly this kind of vulnerability, terrified of being hurt again as Vivian hurt me. But you, Clara, you have never once given me reason to doubt your intentions. I will not let Percival's lies drive you away. Clara's eyes filled with tears, overwhelmed by the fierce protectiveness in his words. What will you do? I will confront him, Edmund said firmly, publicly, if necessary. I will not allow his schemes to destroy your name while I remain silent. That evening, Edmund traveled to London despite the late hour, arriving at a grand ball where much of society, including Lord Percival Hale, had gathered. The room fell into stunned silence as the Duke of Wrenhollow entered, his expression thunderous, his purpose unmistakable. He found Percival near the refreshment table, engaged in idle conversation with several other gentlemen, and approached without hesitation. Percival, Edmund said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet room. A word, if you please. Percival's confident smile faltered slightly. Edmund, what brings you to London so unexpectedly? You know precisely why I am here. Edmund's voice remained calm, controlled, though fury simmered beneath every word. The lies you spread about Miss Whitmore will end tonight. Gasps rippled through the surrounding crowd, whispers spreading rapidly as more guests turned their attention toward the confrontation unfolding before them. I have no idea what you are referring to, Percival said, though his composure had begun visibly cracking. Do not insult me further with false denials, Edmund said sharply. I know your handwriting, Percival, and I recognize your particular brand of calculated cruelty. You fabricated lies about an innocent woman because I refused your sister's proposal, believing it would force my hand. It did not. It has only confirmed how thoroughly unworthy you are of any alliance with my family. The crowd murmured with growing intensity, several onlookers exchanging shocked glances as the truth of Percival's scheme became apparent. You would ruin my family's reputation over a common cataloger, Percival hissed, abandoning his earlier pretense entirely. Miss Whitmore possesses more integrity and honor than you will ever understand, Edmund said, his voice rising with unmistakable conviction. I would rather align myself with her modest circumstances than with a family willing to destroy an innocent woman's reputation for political advantage. The room fell utterly silent, every eye fixed upon the two men, the weight of Edmund's declaration settling heavily across the gathered crowd. So Percival's face flushed with humiliation, understanding now that his scheme had backfired catastrophically, exposed before the very society whose opinion he valued most. This is not over, Edmund, Percival muttered, though the threat carried little weight beneath his evident defeat. It is over, Edmund said firmly. And should any further falsehoods regarding Miss Whitmore emerge, I will ensure all of London knows precisely their true origin. He turned and left the ball without another word, the whispers of the crowd following him out into the cold night air, already shifting from scandal toward admiration for the Duke's fierce, unexpected loyalty. By morning, the truth had spread nearly as quickly as Percival's original lies, London's gossip columns now painting an entirely different story, one of a Duke's unwavering devotion to a woman society had underestimated. Charlotte Hale, mortified by her brother's scheme, quietly withdrew any further interest in Edmund's hand, while Percival's own reputation suffered considerable damage from his exposed cruelty. Clara learned of Edmund's public defense through a breathless letter from Mrs. Fenwick, tears streaming down her face as she read of his fierce, unwavering loyalty. She had never imagined anyone would fight so publicly, so completely, on her behalf. When Edmund returned to Wrenhollow that afternoon, exhausted but resolute, he found her waiting in the library, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You did not have to do that, she whispered. I did, he said simply, because you deserve nothing less than the truth, spoken loudly enough for all of London to hear. Clara crossed the room and, for the first time, closed the distance between them entirely, her hand resting gently against his chest. Thank you, Edmund, for believing in me when so few others would have. I believe in you completely, he said softly, his hand rising to cover hers, more than I have believed in anything, or anyone, in a very long time. The storm had passed, leaving behind only clarity, the fragile bond they had built now stronger than ever, tested by fire and emerging unbroken. Autumn had settled fully across Wrenhollow by the time Edmund made his decision, the gardens outside turning brilliant shades of amber and gold, the air carrying the crisp scent of falling leaves through the estate's open windows. He found Clara in the library, as he always did these days, surrounded by the books that had brought them together months earlier, though the shelves now stood organized and gleaming, a testament to weeks of careful work. "You have finished the cataloging," he observed, noting the completed ledgers stacked neatly upon her desk. "I have," Clara said, a hint of melancholy in her voice. "Which means my contract here has reached its end, Your Grace." The formality of the address struck him harshly, reminding him of how far they had traveled together, and how close he now stood to losing her entirely if he did not speak the words that had been building within him for weeks. "Clara," he said, his voice steady despite the nervousness coursing through him, "I do not wish for you to leave." She turned to face him, surprise evident in her expression. "Edmund, I cannot remain indefinitely as a hired cataloger once the work is complete. It would not be proper, nor practical." "Then do not remain as a cataloger," he said, closing the distance between them with careful, deliberate steps. "Remain as my wife." Clara's breath caught entirely, her eyes widening with shock. "Edmund, I have spent years guarding myself against exactly this kind of vulnerability," he continued, his voice raw with honesty, terrified that trust would only lead to betrayal, as it did with Vivian. "But you, Clara, you have shown me nothing but honesty since the very first moment you challenged me in this very room. You want nothing from my title, my fortune, or my position. You have only ever wanted the truth, spoken plainly, and in return, you gave me back pieces of myself I believed I had lost forever." Tears welled in Clara's eyes as she listened, her heart pounding fiercely within her chest. "Edmund, I have no fortune to offer you, no title, no grand alliance to strengthen your family's position. I do not need any of those things," he said firmly. "I need only you, Clara Whitmore, your honesty, your resilience, your laughter that fills this house with warmth it has not known in years. I love you, completely and without reservation, and I am asking you now, in this library where everything between us began, to become my wife." Clara's tears spilled freely now, overwhelmed by the sincerity radiating from every word he spoke. "Yes," she whispered, then repeated more firmly. "Yes, Edmund. I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as relief and joy flooded through him entirely, the walls he had built over years of guarded loneliness finally, completely dismantled by the woman who had walked unexpectedly into his private library and, in doing so, walked directly into his heart. Lady Beatrice, informed of the engagement that very evening, wept openly with joy, embracing Clara warmly as the granddaughter she had long hoped Edmund might someday bring home. Mrs. Fenwick declared it the happiest news the estate had received in over a decade, and even the staff, who had watched Edmund's transformation over recent months, celebrated quietly among themselves, grateful to see their Duke finally at peace. Their wedding, held the following spring beneath the very oak tree Edmund had once played beneath as a child, drew far less attention from London's gossip columns than anyone anticipated, the earlier scandal long forgotten beneath the genuine warmth of their obvious devotion to one another. Percival Hale did not attend, his own reputation having suffered considerably from his exposed cruelty, while Charlotte, without malice, sent her sincere congratulations from a distance. As Edmund stood beneath the blooming oak tree, watching Clara walk toward him in the soft spring sunlight, he thought of the countless proposals he had rejected over the years, certain each time that no woman could offer him what he truly needed. He understood now that he had simply been waiting, without realizing it, for the right one to walk into his private library and remind him what honest love truly felt like. Their life together unfolded quietly but richly in the years that followed. The library, once forgotten and neglected, became the heart of their home, filled regularly with laughter, quiet conversation, and the soft rustle of pages as they read together each evening, exactly as Edmund's father once had with him. Clara's dream of traveling to Italy was fulfilled within their first year of marriage, Edmund surprising her with a journey to Florence that left her breathless with joy, the small drawing above her old writing desk finally replaced by real memories captured in her own hands. Lady Beatrice lived to see her first great-grandchild born within the walls of Wren Hollow, declaring proudly that the estate had never known such happiness since long before Edmund's father had passed. The staff, who had once whispered nervously about their Duke's cold temperament, now spoke fondly of his transformation, crediting the quiet cataloger who had refused to be intimidated by his sharp words on that very first day. Edmund never forgot the moment Clara first challenged him, standing fearlessly atop that ladder amid clouds of dust, refusing to shrink beneath his anger. It had been, he often told her in later years, the precise moment he began falling in love with her, though neither of them had recognized it as such at the time. Their private library, restored fully to its former grandeur, remained their favorite room within the vast estate, a quiet sanctuary where Duke and Duchess alike could simply exist as themselves, free from the expectations and pressures of London society. It stood as a testament to everything they had overcome together, and everything they had built from the fragile beginnings of an unexpected meeting between a guarded duke and an unwavering woman who had walked, quite by chance, into his private library and forever changed the course of his life. Years later, when their own children asked how their parents had first met, Edmund would smile softly, glancing toward Clara with the same warmth that had never faded since that very first encounter. "Your mother," he would say, "refused to be frightened by me. Even when the whole of London trembled at my temper, she stood her ground, spoke her truth, and in doing so, taught me what it truly meant to be loved without condition or calculation." And Clara, listening quietly beside him, would simply smile, knowing that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with grand declarations or elaborate courtships, but with quiet honesty, shared between two guarded hearts, slowly learning to trust again within the dusty, forgotten shelves of a private library that had been waiting, all along, to bring them both back to life.